This Choircast podcast is brought to you by the Quantum Gospel of Mary and the Lost Gospel of Truth by Keith Giles. For nearly 2,000 years, Mary Magdalene has endured attempts to erase her from the Gospel of John, suppression of her gospel text, and even false allegations by the 6th century Pope of being a prostitute. In this new book, author Keith Giles reveals the truth about Mary's gospel message and restores her prominence as the apostle to the apostles. Available now on Amazon.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney and Bethany Shea.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Nat Turney. I'm here with my brother John, who is nestled in his I don't even know what you call that room anymore. It's like, looks like an observatory of some kind. But
I just call it the podcast room.
Oh, so John is nestled in the podcast room. How appropriate.
Yeah.
Ensconced as he is in the mountaintops of Northern California. Say hi, John.
Hi, John.
And then we also have from Northern California. We got, I shouldn't probably dox people and say where you live. I'll give you address next time.
There you go.
If you want to reach out to her personally, here's her phone number. No, we have Bethany with us. Say hey to everybody, Bethany.
Hi, friends.
And again, this is the podcast we call This Is Not Church, because if it was church, you would have left by now. And John and I would be with you, and Bethany would be desperately trying to get you to stay and offering you oatmeal cookies, which, by the way, would not be enough to get me to stay. Chocolate chip, and we could talk. A nice ginger snap.
Ooh.
That's an underrated cookie. Let's have an entire podcast one day about, all right, what are the best cookies?
Ginger snap or ginger molasses?
Oh, no. Now you upped it. Okay, so ginger snap is great. Ginger molasses, that's different altogether.
It's like chewy on the inside and like kind of crispy on the outside. It's just perfection.
I think when I form my new religion, which I'm working on, by the way, and it won't be a cult. Oh, yeah. It's going to be centered around the sacredness of the cookie. Because there's no bad cookie. There's just better cookies.
I think that's called crumble. Isn't that something?
Oh, those are okay. I take back what I said. Crumble are terrible.
Oh, they are, aren't they?
Terrible.
Oh my gosh, my daughter loves them, but I think it's because TikTok made her love them.
They're beautiful and horrifying, and they're not good. They make every time I eat a crumble cookie, I get sick.
They're so sweet.
They're mostly cake. They're not even a cookie. And Cristina is sitting here going, what the hell did I get myself into? I think there's a lot of theology we could pull out of the different merits of the cookie. But anyway, we do have a guest with us, which I guess 2 minutes in, I should probably acknowledge that she's here. So we're super, super excited to talk to her. Her name is Cristina Rathbone. And so let me tell you a little bit about her, and we're going to jump into a conversation that hopefully deviates from cookies and the merits therein. So Cristina Rathbone is an award-winning journalist, Episcopal priest, and spiritual director. She's the author of On the Outside Looking In, A Year in an Inner City High School, and A World Apart, Women, Prisons, and Life Behind Bars. In partnership with Episcopal Migration Ministries, she founded Neighbor to Neighbor, a national network that supports congregations as they accompany newly arrived asylum seekers. Rathbone is the mother of 2 sons and lives in Massachusetts. And her latest book, The Asylum Seekers, A Chronicle of Life, Death, and Community at the Border. I can't think of a more prescient topic than this. I mean, this is something that I think is on everybody's minds, and I'm very, very keen to hear your perspective on it. But first, let me say welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks so much. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. You are in one of my favorite cities in the world. I do really, really love Boston, so I'm jealous that you're there and I'm out here in the desert of West Texas. But I'll get back to Boston one day. If you wouldn't mind, we like to kick things off usually by talking to folks about a little bit of their background, their spiritual background, if there is one to speak of, and just kind of catch us up with what got you into this work that you do.
Yeah, thanks. I grew up not going to church at all, that's for certain. Though we did go religiously every Christmas Eve. So I grew up thinking that we were quite a religious family. And then once I left my family home, which was in London, my mother's Cuban, my father was English. I was born here, but raised in London. Once I left my family home, it wasn't a big thing to leave the church. I just stopped going on Christmas Eve, and that was that. And then many years later, when I was working on the book about women in prison, a colleague's husband passed away. And of course, I went to the funeral, and it was in an Episcopal church. And it was the first time I'd been in a church for decades. And kaboom, I sort of felt some kind of presence I couldn't explain, and recognized that presence as being something I'd witnessed in the kids that I'd written my first book about, out on the street, gang kids and drug dealing kids, kids who were really struggling, and that I'd witnessed in women who'd been in prison, that I witnessed with folks on the street who I'd befriended and spent time with. And so I started to begin to learn more about this thing called Christianity. But I came to it very unburdened, right? I was just a blank slate. I was like 35 years old, and I was like, what is this now? Tell me about this. So it's a very different way to entering into a whole system of thought and belief than growing up in it. And I'm grateful for that just clean slate that I had walking in. I didn't have childhood things that I had to shuck off. I just was like, tell me this, tell me that. What is this? What is that? And very, very quickly, I started becoming a regular churchgoer, and then felt the call to be ordained, and then had to go to seminary, and became a priest in 2009, almost exactly 10 years to the day from that day I first walked into that church. And my question always was, how am I going to be a priest? Because in my whole life, I've never spent any time with people who go to church. My community was very, very secular, filmmakers and writers and people like that. So how was this going to work out? And I just sort of had to trust that something would work out. And indeed it did. A couple of years later, I came upon a church that had been created outside for folks who lived on the street. And as soon as I entered that space, I was like, okay, here we go. Here's a space that I feel really at home with. And then I worked with homeless folks as a priest for 12 years before heading to the border in 2019.
So 2019, you head to the border. There's a million directions we could go with this, but just your initial visceral reaction to that scene at the border. First of all, where on the border were you?
I was in Juarez, El Paso.
Okay, yeah.
And I had left the community of homeless people in Boston because we'd founded together a faith community. And after a while, the founder has to leave for that community to continue to thrive and blossom and grow. And I was way past that while because I didn't want to leave. But then 2019, it was the first Trump administration. I'm half Cuban, as I mentioned earlier. So I felt a particular call to be with people who were having experiences very similar to my family's experience, except the whole system of immigration had changed. And so they weren't being given the chance. My mother's family were. I don't believe in like pre-created ministries that you create sort of in your attic space and then go plonk down in a place of suffering. So I couldn't tell anybody what the ministry was that I wanted to do because I didn't know, because I had to first be there and listen and learn from the only people who I believe did know, who were the asylum seekers and migrants and refugees themselves. So I just raised enough money to last for 6 months and started off in Tijuana, made my way more and more east until Juarez, El Paso seemed very clearly to be the place where I needed to stay.
Well, that's such an interesting part of the world. If people haven't been to El Paso, Juarez, can you describe that? I've been there a handful of times. I live not super far from there, but if people haven't seen, one of the things I think is most striking, maybe you can speak to this, is you can visually see the disparity of economic, life there. You can, because as soon as you look over the border into Juarez, you see the poverty, especially right there along the border. And then it's just sort of contrasted with El Paso, which is not the nicest place in the world, but it was visually striking the first time I went there. I'm like, holy mackerel, this is sort of in your face, but you're also there on the ground with folks who are traversing that border, I would imagine, whether illegal, I don't even like to use the word illegal, but you know what I'm saying. What was that like for you to see? Was that even your first time seeing that?
It's this, the setting of it, of Juarez, El Paso is so incredible because it's just in a valley ringed by mountains. So as you say, you go up a mountain in El Paso and you look across and it's obviously, El Paso and Juarez is obviously supposed to be one place in this world surrounded by mountains.
Exactly.
So the fact that there's an international border running through it is really surreal. And that's what struck me most of all, just the random nature of the division between El Paso and Juarez, between the US and Mexico. So I'd been spending time on the border up and down a bit, but I'd never spent much time in the desert before. I'm an East Coast person and also an English person, lots of green, trees, grass, all of those kinds of things. And I was shocked by how dry everything was, how different everything was, and how hard it made everything, even the basics of life on both sides of the border. So that was the first thing that struck me. And then, of course, on the southern side of the border, people were able to cross the border at that stage, 2019, 2020, to go shopping, have dinner, visit with family, tons and tons of families living on both sides of the border. But the people that I served were seeking asylum, which is to say they were seeking the protection of the United States of America, having fled from serious, life-threatening behaviors on the part of their governments or of organizations that were sort of serving as proxy governments in their towns and cities. So these are not people who were just trying to sneak into the US. They were people who were officially openly asking for the protection of the United States, and waiting for their opportunity to do that. And of course, to ask for asylum is a right that's enshrined both by the UN and by our own American laws. And everybody knew this. And so the people on the Border Patrol agents never said, no, you can't ask for asylum. They just said, you can't ask for asylum right now because we're full. Come back later. And that, not right now, come back later, that lasted months and months and months and months for any given family. And just to be clear, this isn't people asking to be granted asylum. This is people asking for the right to ask for asylum, to request asylum. So it was really terrible. And of course, Juarez, fifth most dangerous city in the world. And these are families, parents and young kids living out on a single block in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods of Juarez, just on the sidewalk with nothing. So, yeah, and I'm a mom and your parents, I know. So just imagine that. You've got what you've managed to flee with. You've got a backpack. Your kids have backpacks, and now your home is the sidewalk in an incredibly dangerous neighborhood, and you are stuck. You can't go back because you've fled real danger, and you can't go forward because the system is being held up by the U.S. administration. So you're just trapped there.
Well, and what's frightening is so many of those folks had left violence that was worse than what they're experiencing in Juarez, even. So if they've left El Salvador, if they've left other parts of Mexico, Guatemala, even at some points, I mean, they're fleeing. A lot of them are fleeing crime, gang violence, all kinds of stuff. And so, including
the murder of their children, snatching of their parents, the kidnapping of young children. Horrors. Wives taken, abused, sexually assaulted, dumped on the side of the road. I mean, these are the kinds of things that many of the families had been subjected to and were in flight from. So horrors.
So they would be having to wait there for quite some time to even get an answer. How were they able to survive in that space? Like, if they weren't able to go to work, they had to keep an eye on their children. What was that like what do you think that was like for them?
Well, the amazing thing that they did is they created a community that established rules and norms and safety measures and ensured fairness and justice for everybody who was there. So that asylum seekers, contrary to what we hear so often in the press, are in fact the upstanding leaders of their community, because they are the people who are perhaps burdened with an overly developed sense of justice. And they are the ones who say no to whatever the corrupt system is, to whatever is being asked of them that is terrible. They're not the ones who are like, I just got to shuffle on and get by because that's what it takes to survive. They're the ones who say, I will not bend. I will not do that corrupt thing. So this community was filled with these amazing leaders. And so the community that they then established, even on this one block in Juarez, ensured that the mom who had no formula for her kids was given formula. The moms who had no diapers was given diapers. The families who had no mattresses, little tiny mattress pads, really, were given mattress pads. All these systems were created by members of the asylum-seeking community themselves. And more even than that, they also created a system, they themselves, which managed approaches to the border, where each family would say, I am a Mexican citizen, I am seeking the protection of the United States. And then most often, as I said, would be told, not now. They ensured that the family that arrived first did that until they were allowed finally to ask for asylum. And only then would the second family go. And they maintained this for 4 months, which was the duration of this community existing on the street.
What was your role as a minister in that space? And what was that experience like for you?
So I was a unofficial chaplain. And what do I mean by chaplain? Someone who is openly a person of faith, a faith leader, but there's no church building or structure. Most people in that community were Roman Catholic. And so I wasn't going to be their priest in the way that one would normally think about it. But there I was every day, being with them, sitting with them, witnessing their lives, listening to their stories, praying with them, and then doing what I could to offer the privilege that my American passport lends me to them. So I realized pretty quickly that the kids needed some normalcy. I don't want to call them classes because I am not a teacher of young kids, but there was no one else. So I became a teacher of young kids, and we had daily class, which was really, coloring and cutting and reading stories, which we were very helped by the parents themselves. And then I also took to accompanying families up to the checkpoint, and I would put a collar on for that and a big old cross, which I didn't usually wear, because I just thought maybe as an ordained member of the clergy, I would have a little bit more power than people seeking asylum, and maybe that would help. And sometimes it did, and sometimes it didn't. But I went up every day with them. And then I would help reach out across the border. Only I could go back and forth with freedom. And so I would reach out to faith communities in El Paso and try to help raise food and sandwiches and all those things that I mentioned before, money for water. So I was sort of just there doing what I could, joining the team and supporting the team, the leadership team from the community itself, to do the real work of holding the community together.
I found it interesting in one part of the book where I think it was it with the children that you went and you would give them rubber gloves and then they would go and clean up. And the joy for them was getting the rubber gloves.
Yeah, the high rubber gloves.
Yeah.
Blue with powder.
I thought
the blue gloves with powder on the inside, those were like, whoa, those were the platinum gloves. We probably got those like 5 times. But usually we just had white with no powder. Fairly often we had white with powder, and sometimes we had blue with no powder. But kids are incredible. They're so resilient. They're so strong. They're so courageous. And they will find joy and play in anything. And it was, in fact, that process of clearing up the street, which, by the way, was not dirty. The parents would find things to give the kids as a way of helping the kids help them. It was this beautiful cycle of love in miniature. And that finally, after several weeks, finally got into my thick skull that, I should probably be doing more than this for the kids. We should probably get some coloring books and some scissors and some glue and some glitter and some bubbles.
Of course, glitter.
Of course, glitter.
100%. Of course. No, I'm speechless a little bit because mostly what we can surmise from this situation is just second or third hand. And so it's I can empathize, but I think your experience there in person must have deepened that level of empathy to where, and maybe you can speak to that lack of empathy in our current political climate seems to be lacking, seems to be not even just that it's missing, but that it's under attack.
Yeah. Empathy's become an evil thing now under the current administration, which I can't even get my head around.
Well, it feels like somebody just read Ayn Rand and ran with it, but yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but so lack of empathy, let's talk about that.
I think it's more than lack of empathy. I think it's denigration. I think it's trying to roil people up towards hatred, towards the opposite, towards fear. I mean, the amount of lies that have been told about asylum seekers is extraordinary and absurd, except that it's not at all funny because it's the consequences are so horrific. And certainly being on the border made my innate knowledge that none of this was true super abundantly clear. And I went down there. I had been a writer and a journalist before I was ordained, but I had no idea that I would write anything on the border. You know, I went down there to see what I could do as a human being first, as a priest second, and as a US citizen third. What can I and we do that is probably really small, but nonetheless real? And it was only when I got back and I was just having a hard time even talking to dear friends about the experiences on the border. I just couldn't find words. I found myself not being able to paint a picture that anyone else could see, that I started to write just to find words for my own healing around the suffering that I had just gotten a taste of. And it was out of that finally I thought, oh, maybe I'll write a book precisely for that reason, so that others don't have to go to the border and do all of that. They can read the book and really get a picture of who the people are that are being so maligned day after day after day after day in this country, and particularly through the eyes of a person of faith, an often struggling person of faith. So this isn't the type of book where I'm just like, and then the Lord said. It's more like, how can I even believe in anything given this situation? So I felt it was really important to put my own very human and I think natural and I also believe faithful struggles with faith, because I believe that the point of faith and the point of Jesus in particular is to lead us to the places of suffering and to share with those people of suffering, to receive from them, to give to them, and to be with them. And too often I think faith just gets forgotten about, or the tenets of our faith get forgotten about when people leave the church. And for me, it's sort of the opposite of your podcast name. For me, that street was church. It was church. We didn't have prayer services. We didn't sing hymns, but it was church for sure.
Well, and to be fair, that really is not to put too fine a point on it, but that's the point of the podcast name is this thing we've typically called church is not church.
Amen.
Church is where we experience those things like you just said. I've been in bars and had church. I have, Amen. I have been in all kinds of places and had church. And sometimes the least churchy places I've been have been inside the four walls of an institutional church. And I have felt farther from God in those places. And especially in the brand of Christianity that is so prevalent in our country right now. What I'm seeing shift and what makes me fearful and what makes me sad is the shift we went from, a religion that was centered around compassion and empathy and kindness and caring for the suffering and the poor, all words of Jesus. Weird that we would have thought that, to a place of almost complacency, which was also concerning. And then to a place now of almost ennobling people's lack of empathy. It's almost become a point of pride that I won't be ruled by my emotions. This has to be logical and this has to be sensible and blah, 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 while they turn a blind eye to some very, very real suffering that if it was happening to them, I think they would expect someone to care. I guess I might, in my roundabout way, I don't know. I don't know if there's a way back from that. I'm hopeful, but that hope is diminishing on the daily.
There has to be a way back from that. I have no idea what it is, but there has to be. Particularly around a religion. I was in church on Sunday. I'm working with a council of churches now, so I'm not serving a particular church, which leaves me free to roam around. And I was looking at a crucifix and just thinking, there he is, this Jesus, this incredible Jesus, crucified. And what are we doing as his followers? How can we be praying to a God who became human and chose not to become, people often say he didn't become a king but he didn't even become an upstanding citizen, right? He just became a wanderer arounder. and ended up being arrested and tortured and executed. And we as Christians, I think too often use these fancy words for what actually happened in order to muffle it. And I think once we start thinking and remembering who we have to believe that was on purpose, right? It wasn't a random mistake. And so then what does that mean for us? I'm so befuddled by and confounded by some of the things that supposed Christians are offering to each other as teachings these days. I don't understand how they can be followers of a man who was also God and who was crucified with a couple of thieves.
Yeah, I agree.
Whereas by the flip side, down on the border, Jesus is alive and well. Like everywhere I ran into Jesus, in the faces of these children, the faces of their parents. I mean, that was the other reason I went to the border was, I was so in touch with Jesus present among us when I was working out on the street with folks who live there. And I'm just one of those types of people who need that. And sure enough, there he was on the border amongst those seeking the protection of our country.
You write how, can I read a little bit of your book? Is that okay?
Please, it's an honor. Yeah.
So beautiful. You write, the task in front of me, I kept trying to remind myself, was not so much to build something, though that could sometimes be important, as simply to remain open specifically to the layered and horrifying truths on the ground, as well as to my own complex, always various humanity in the face of equally complex and various humanity of every person I met. This kind of openness is hard enough to maintain anywhere. But in a world where inhumanity reigned, where personhood was unilaterally and preemptively denied, and so where cruelty abounded, it was, I think, the hardest thing of all. But it was all that mattered in the end, at least for me. And then you write about how the word became flesh. And I just was so taken by that, the sense of like you going there and settling there and being with the people, like recognizing that the word became flesh, that Christ became flesh and dwelled among the people. You also were a type of fleshness among people who were needing to see the divine and needing to be reminded that they are worthy of love and compassion. And I'm curious how long you stayed there in that space before you moved away, and what helped you stay in that thing? Like when you left, at the end of the day, you went back to your home that you were staying in. How did you decompress? How did you care for your own soul? What did community look like for you to fill yourself up as well?
Oh, what generous questions. Thank you. Yeah, I feel it's really important to be clear that I did not sleep out on the sidewalk, right? They slept on the sidewalk and I went back across the bridge and slept in a little bed, a rented bedroom in an apartment in El Paso in total safety. And so that in and of itself was quite something to do every day, to sort of desert the people I was supposedly serving every day. Felt like a lot, but it was all I could do. I couldn't do more than that. And that's one of the things that I think prevents people from doing this kind of work, is that you bump into your own limitations quite quickly and very often. So I didn't have very much community there outside of the asylum seeking community, because it was with them that I spent a lot of time, though there were a bunch of incredible kick-ass retired Roman Catholic nuns who I did spend time with, because they get things done.
Awesome.
And
yes, they do.
They are amazing. And they were incredible, so strong older women. So that was really my community. And how I remained really with help from prayer, and because the asylum seekers themselves were so extraordinary that there was nothing I knew I couldn't learn from them. So I stayed with them. I was in Juarez the day the first person from that community arrived, and I stayed with them until that community was ultimately destroyed by the Mexican government, who the president was coming for a visit, and they didn't want to be embarrassed by the sight of having Mexican asylum seekers seeking protection of the US. They denied that this was the case, but the day before the president arrived, garbage trucks came in and all kinds of police came in, and they picked up all those makeshift places where people dwelled, and they threw them all in the garbage trucks. And the stuff that people had managed to take from their homes and save was gone. And all the parents were threatened with arrest for abusing their children because they were sleeping outside with them. So 45 of them went to an Anglican shelter, and the rest sort of scattered around the downtown area. And we all stayed in touch. And I stayed in Juarez until the last person from that community was able to ask for asylum. Though the vast majority of the people from that community, all of them were allowed finally to ask for asylum after 4 months, but almost all of them were spat back out to Mexico almost immediately.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions, was what's the difference between being able to ask for asylum and actually getting asylum?
Yeah, such a huge difference. So asking for asylum, then you have an initial hearing called a credible fear interview. And that's the bar. It just has to be credible. You don't have to prove that such and such has happened to you. You just need it just needs to be a believable, as if level. And if you pass that credible fear interview, then you're allowed to pursue an asylum case in the States. And because there are not enough judges, there's really long backup, many, many months and often years.
Do people tend to seek asylum? Are most of the people that are seeking asylum from Mexico themselves, or are they from other places in Latin America?
And the world. That's a great question.
Okay.
So what was strange about this community of people was that they were all Mexican. And that was why they were able to stay out on the street. There were shelters set up for foreigners to Mexico who had come to Mexico to pass through to try to get asylum in the States. And they had to stay in those shelters. The Mexicans were still in their own country. So they were able to say, we're not going to go and stay in those shelters you've set up for people from other countries. We're going to stay right here at the foot of the bridge of the port of entry to the States so that we can go and ask those Border Patrol agents every 2 hours, 24 hours a day, in the hopes that at some point one of them will say, okay, you family, you can come in. And so that's what happened. But the vast majority are not from Mexico. They're from across Central and South America and, in fact, the world.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that escapes people is that migratory path from Central and South America and other parts of the world. Just because it culminates in Mexico doesn't mean that they all originated there. And part of me is like, well, I mean, I don't know. I'm maybe an unpopular opinion. I think borders are bullshit. I'm kind of an open borders guy. You know, I don't understand these arbitrary lines we've drawn where we've decided you can come in and you have to go. But I know perhaps politically that's not practical. Whatever. My humanity says that's an arbitrary impediment to people's freedom and autonomy to move about as they see fit. But do you advocate for some sort of reforms in our approach, I guess, to how we either vet immigrants or allow them in, or I don't. It just seems to me that if somebody has to go and have an interview where they have to prove that they're afraid, that we've set already a subjective bar there that just, okay, well, what does that mean? Credible fear. How do I prove that? And can someone arbitrarily say, nah, not buying it. Get out of here.
Yeah. I mean, my simplification there is the most grotesque oversimplification of what is an incredibly baroque system. Sure. So I think every single person who knows anything about immigration, and I'm not right now just for the minute talking about the current administration, I'm just talking about for the past 15, 20 years, the immigration system is utterly broken.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so does it need to be reformed? Absolutely. What the current administration has done is taken advantage of that. The border is completely shut. No one, not one single human being. Let's say any one of you or I, let's say, God forbid, our whole families were assassinated and killed in front of our very eyes, and we managed to get to the US border. That's our tough, because there is no asylum, nothing. There's nothing to be done about it. We will not be allowed to ask for asylum today, yesterday, since January 6th. Forget it. It's shut. So that basically, and there's no refugees coming in except for the Afrikaners from South Africa, right? So there is no immigration system at the moment, except for the type of immigration where, if you need some programmer for ICM or whatever, they can get a special visa, that type of thing. But for just general, normal people, there is no immigration system left.
Well, and that has to put a lot of pressure, then I would imagine, on folks to come in other ways. It doesn't stop people from wanting to come, I wouldn't think.
It doesn't stop people from wanting to come, but then if you couple that with the militarization of the border, basically very few people are coming into this country right now. And none legally, but by legally, none through the asylum system. Zero.
So if somebody wants to come across the border to work a job that they have in the United States, that's not allowed at this moment?
No, so there are still people doing legal daily crossings. The border is not shut that way. But if you're seeking asylum, it is shut.
Okay.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's hard. I wish I had more profound words to say other than wow. But
yeah.
And we don't have to mince words. I mean, we can lay this current crisis at the feet of the current administration.
Absolutely. People are definitely 100% with certainty dying as a result of these policies that have been input by this administration and by some of the minds that are running this administration that are really... the only way I can understand them is that they're seeking suffering of others. I can't understand them in any other way.
I can't think of... I cannot put into words any other way other than that's the purpose of it. Let's hurt some people, and it's Machiavellian. It's I don't understand it. And to add insult to injury, many of these people will do this in the name of Jesus. Will do this in the name of our religion, and that really just makes you want to say, "Well, it's time to start a new religion then, because this one's fucked up and we got to go."
No, it makes me want to say, "Okay, we've got to get out there." I mean, I'm not one for waving flags. I haven't been one in my past, or for carrying images of Jesus in the streets. It's just not my type of thing. However, this is the time to be doing it. I am now out to reclaim Jesus and the American flag.
Amen.
Why should everybody else have him? The Jesus that I follow, I will follow anywhere, and he's incredible.
Amen.
And I don't want people who think of him as some militaristic guy. I don't want them to have ownership of him. They cannot, in fact. They will not, and they cannot, and they do not. So I think it's a time for people of faith of all kinds to really step out into the marketplace. This is not the time to be people are going to think I'm like that kind of Christian. Who cares?
That's right.
Claim it.
Well, one thing I was oddly moved by, and this took me aback, was when Kamala Harris was announced as the Democratic candidate and at the Democratic National Committee. There was such a display of patriotism that I usually recoil from. That is not my thing. And there was, but it was such a protest move. We're tired of you guys claiming to be the real Americans. We all love our country too. We love this place, and we would very much like to see the dream of it fully realized. And we're tired of you guys shitting all over it and claiming to have exclusive rights to it. I was strangely touched by that. And I said, normally that sort of an open display of almost nationalism is it sucks off other flags for me of the red variety. But I think all of that was a roundabout way of saying, I think there's a lot of truth in what you just said. It is high time to reclaim what it means to be, at least on some level, what it means to be Christian, because I'm tired of these people speaking for me.
And publicly.
I'm tired. Yeah. I don't understand. Oh, and maybe that's because we've acquiesced too much to that. And it's time to, I don't know. I'm not even sure how to finish that sentence. So it's time to do something different. John, say something smart.
Say something smart. Thank you. Thank you for that. Well, getting back to the book, I one of the questions I had, and it almost feels like a pointless question now because we've moved beyond to, what immigration looks like now. But back when you were there, what gave the asylum seekers hope enough to stand there day in, day out and not give up? Because, from the stories I read in this book, it's just a story of hope from their point of view. Tragedy too, obviously, but a story of hope that that they will be heard if they try, if they continue and try. But what gave them hope?
Such a good question. And I think there are three things probably. The first is their faith. They were people of incredibly deep faith. I mean, just awe-inspiringly deep faith. And they believed and knew that God was with them and that their future was in God's hands. And this was one of the things I struggled with a lot, because they would always say, the equivalent of, if God wills it, it will happen. And I just sort of wanted to say, God does will it. God does will it. But they were willing to wait for the sign, so they really did place themselves in the hand of God in a way that I found extraordinary. Everyone in the community. So that's the first thing. The second thing is they really did believe in this country as a place of fairness and opportunity and freedom and safety. They really believe in the United States of America. Deep, kind of so heartbreaking, almost makes me cry. And the third thing is their children, that all of these people were doing it for their kids. They were willing to risk their own lives so that their kids would be safe. And I think that is a kind of trinity of hope, and in God, in a future, in a place that will welcome them and care for them, and that they will work for very, very hard and give their hearts to, and their children.
For me, that's a patriotism I can get behind. Their belief in how great our country is. I mean,
they're the ones that would make our country great. They're the ones who speak that hope and speak that truth into our country when a lot of us have given up.
As has happened, right, with the newcomers generation after generation. All those newcomers are the most patriotic Americans that exist.
Well, and even from a very pragmatic point of view, I mean, study after study after study has shown how much more immigrants have poured into our country than they take. I mean, it's not even close. The financial impact, the entrepreneurship. I mean, I don't know. Maybe we could do an exchange program where we allow one family in and we kick one crappy family out. Okay, that was wrong.
Decide that. Oh.
I will be the arbiter.
You get to be the one.
Self-appointed arbiter of who gets to go and who gets. You know what? Y'all can come, but nah. No, I'm just. But there was a time in this country, and I'm old enough to remember that there was a time in this country when we valued and like we patted ourselves on the back because we were so much of a melting pot, and our diversity was what made us strong. And there was no whatever we thought of as being an American was an amalgam of all of these people coming together and finding at least like some common purpose, but expressed in all these different ways. And that was always seen I always thought as a strength. And this shift, that's what scares me about this is not that we've got into this sort of, I guess, cyclical thing of being isolationist into we need to hold on to what's ours as though it's some sort of finite, thing that we can't let go of. Gosh, and I keep wanting to frame this as a question. I don't know what the question I'm asking, to be honest with you. I'm just ranting a bit.
Well, I mean,
but go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, I mean, for good or for bad, it's for bad.
Okay. For bad.
This comes down to an issue of racism. I mean, it really does, because you don't hear people complaining about any white immigrants. I mean, if they're going to start pointing fingers at people who are the problem, the quote unquote problem in this country, they are people of color. And so, I mean, we have to first come to understand the racism that's inherent in this system. And that's rough. That's tough.
Yeah, it is rough.
And can I add that this is something that often happens in conversations that I have with my friends, with you guys, with everybody, that we take one issue and then and then what about this? And then what about that? And what about this? And then in the end, we're all just left like, Pfluh. There's nothing to be done. And I am here to say, no, there is lots we can do. Just not for the powerful people, and even for lawyers and judges, they have their work cut out for them. They know what they have to do. But for people who are just people, who have our daily jobs and do our work, there is so much we can do and must do now. And this piling on of problem on problem on problem is something that prevents us from doing even small, real things. And if we were all doing small, real things, this country will turn around. And this country has to turn around. And the time for it to start is now. And especially, not only, but especially if we're even trying to become Christian one day, this is the time to start, putting our bodies where our mouths and supposedly our hearts are. And I'm not talking about big, huge things, but just small things. Finding, the border is now everywhere in this country. It's in every town, every city, every county. So go find that organization that's working to either help protect folks now, or helping support them, or helping to tutor people, or helping with the kids, and go and do one small thing with that organization. And that is the medicine to the anxiety, despair, anguish, depression that so many of us are feeling about our country today. The medicine I've discovered is to go and find a person, a real person who is suffering as a result of this, and do one small real thing with them. And the fact of doing the small real thing is real. And also the medicine then just bathes you, and then it gets catching to the next person, the next person, the next person.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I just taught on Zacchaeus yesterday. I preach at my church every Sunday, and I was noticing how Zacchaeus had this heart change that shifted everything in his life, but yet he probably still went back to his unjust job in a corrupt system and a government that was just a mess. And he was still benefiting from this job that he was working in, but since his heart was changed, I would imagine that he was choosing not to add to the corruption as he was in the past. And I think that living in a country that we live in today that feels corrupt in many ways, what does it mean for us to live outside of that corruption while we're still in the system that we can't possibly change on our own, but we get to change the people in our lives that are around us? That, Zacchaeus, I imagine him like inviting his tax collector friends over to his house and like actually sharing meals with them and helping his tiny community with the resources he had. And still the Roman government ruled, and he still worked for the Roman government, but yet he was a difference in that space. So I kept thinking about like these three things that you said brought people hope: people's faith, the belief in a country that could become great, or at least kind, and their hope with their children. And it was just like, it's such a witness to the beauty of Christ. I mean, it's just the most beautiful thing. And I'm curious, how has your faith brought you hope in these sorts of spaces? Like, how does hope come alive in you, especially when you've seen such tragedy within the prison system and within homelessness and within the border?
It's true. These are all terrible places where I've chosen to spend the bulk of my life. But why have I chosen to spend the bulk of my life there? Even before I walked into that church and had a name for it, because Jesus is there. Because the power of life and love and hope is there. And it's there for someone like me who doesn't deal with like subtle things, who needs like a wallop upside the head. It's there so obviously that it can't be denied. So I find the hope in those people who are struggling. It's just, and I love joy, don't get me wrong, and I love fun, but the truest and most searing and transformative joy I've experienced is in the encounter, the sacred encounter even, with someone who is right now suffering, and who is finding ways through it. And they're not always neat and tidy ways, that's for sure, but finding ways through it, and it's just bright and shiny. And that's the individual. I think that is, just like you said, I'd love to hear your homily, because that's what you're talking about for Zacchaeus. He's dealing on the individual scale, and what we're taught through Jesus is the individual is everything. Jesus was an individual, right? So one person is everything. So never discount the power of having an encounter with one person, because both people can be completely transformed, and then that's teaching. But I have one. Can I just jump in for 1 second? Sorry.
Please do. Oh, I will. You're fine.
There's 2 paragraphs, which, with your permission, I would love to read. Why? Because since the book has come out, these 2 paragraphs have been the thing that have ignited people to be able to go off filled with hope. Because just like the asylum seekers need hope, we also need hope to persevere. Because these times are pretty hard, and I honestly think they're going to get harder before they get better. And so without hope, it doesn't look good. So all of us need hope, and people who are standing up to this administration and standing in resistance to its unjust ways also need hope more than ever. It's on 113 to 114. Is it okay if I read it?
Oh, please do.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's just exactly what you were saying, basically, Bethany. Small, real things. Small, real things. This is what I kept trying to remember on the border and to trust. Not big, impressive things, but small, real things are the way to love. With, through, and for the other. Small, not because we can't be bothered, but because we are small ourselves. And because every time we honor this smallness without shutting down, every time we acknowledge our lack of sufficiency and remain willing, even so, to both meet and be met by the other, well, whatever follows then will both come from and lead to the realm of abundance some of us call God. And real transformation will happen only on an infinitesimal scale. This is how small, real things make a small, real difference. And this is important too. Because small, real things are necessarily incarnate, they cannot be faked or sold or even advertised. They can only be sought in the moment and then welcomed. They require nothing flashy, nothing expensive, only a mute and muscularly passive stance full of willingness and reliability and vulnerability. It isn't that small, real things don't sometimes become large, real things, because they do. It isn't the smallness that's the point, but the intention. It's as if the act of desiring and then seeking something small liberates us to receive without measure. As if by not aiming for bigness, or even for success, we somehow become freed from the regular marketplace world in which something is always given in exchange for something else, and enter instead a realm where giving and receiving become the same thing. Here are a couple of sentences by Sandra Cisneros, which cheered me up one dark night in El Paso, because they say more or less the same thing, only more simply. I don't know anything, she writes, but I know this. Whatever is done with love, in the name of others, without self-gain, whatever is done with the heart, on behalf of someone or something, whatever work we make with complete humility will always come out beautifully, and something more valuable than fame or money will come. This I know.
Something that we say at our church often is, get ready because God is going to do something really, really small.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
That's great. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there is something about the aggregate too, though, isn't there? I mean, you're 100% right that it can become, and it has become, overwhelming. And so, that's a path forward for a lot of us who are like, well, I don't even know where to start. Like this task seems so monumental. I'm reminded of a book that Brian Zahnd wrote a few years ago, and I butchered the title, but essentially it was dealing with the idea that we are all sort of Christians living in exile. So relating our experience to maybe how the Israelites felt when they were in exile in Babylon. How do you maintain your sense of self when you're surrounded by a culture that wants to erode that? How do you maintain your sense of community when you're surrounded by a culture that doesn't value that? And what I think is a microcosm of what you saw with that community on the border is them doing their very, very best to maintain their community, their sense of self, their hope, even while they're being pushed on from every direction. We need that here, because there are a lot of us who right now feel like I don't recognize the country I live in. This is not the country I was raised in. It's not the country I raised my kids in. It's actually a little bit terrifying, if I'm being honest, how little of this resembles the idealized picture of America. So I say all that to say I'm appreciative for the push towards small things, because I think that's the path forward, is an aggregate of a bunch of us doing just doing what we can. My little town of West Texas, which is very, 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 very much MAGA country. This is Trump's stomping ground. We had about 250 people show up to a protest, and the local press derided it as a tiny amount of people. And I drove by and went, oh my gosh, there's 200 people in this town who would do this. I was shocked and encouraged, and we honked and waved and cheered them on. And I didn't know what was happening, but it was that day when all the massive protests took across. I didn't think there'd be any. I thought there might be 5, and there was hundreds. And I was like, all right, now I'm thinking we're not completely alone here. There are people out there of like mind who are willing to stand up and say, no, this can't continue. So yeah, thank you very, very much for that. Wow. We could talk to you for 2 more hours, but we don't want to take any more. I mean, I think this is a good place, a natural place to pause. And I say pause because I'd very much like to talk to you again.
I'd love that.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch, where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.